So give us your view about what you think happens under this Congress when it comes to the financials.
Well, I think anytime you have a split Congress, split control between the House and the Senate and the administration, first of all, not a lot happens in terms of legislation. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And then when things do happen, they tend to be bipartisan because that's the only way you can get it done. So sure, I saw your interview with Ranking Member Waters, who's likely to be the chairman of the Financial Services Committee. Every Congress that comes in, Republican, Democrat, has investigative hearings. Congress always exercises its oversight responsibility. But I think when you cut through it, you want to look at what policy is going to get done. And I think we have to look at what Congressman Waters has worked on over the years. She's been interested in things like lifeline banking, affordable home ownership. And to me, that looks to things like housing finance reform that you could see, where, again, that's something the Treasury would like. The Treasury Secretary Mnuchin has said he wants to do. Senator Crapo, chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, wants to do. I think you'll see things like that. I think you'll see things in the retirement space where there's a bipartisan movement towards multi-employer retirement plans. So I think that's what we'll look for. So the Wells Fargo, Deutsche Bank, any investigation there, you feel like that would be just isolated, idiosyncratic cases then? Well, I'm obviously not going to comment on any individual firm. I think, there have been hearings on issues like that. There'll be hearings on issues like that in the future. The question is, does that lead to any policy issues or not? We don't know. I think to drive policy through legislation, you're going to have bipartisan consensus in the House and in the Senate. And I think the other thing is we have to look at what does the new House look like. We know what the aggregate numbers are, but we have to see where are these new members coming from. We have a lot of new suburban Democrats, coming from what were previously red districts, now have shifted to blue districts. But what type of districts are they? Well, and a lot of first-time legislators. Absolutely. People who are new to the process, who may have very different views about things. Sure, you got a lot of veterans, small business owners, corporate lawyers, and the like. Specifically in the area of financial regulation or deregulation, is there anything that you can see that might have bipartisan support? We're talking about other things like infrastructure. We don't know if that's going to get done. Other areas. Can you in your area say, there's one there that I think maybe Democrats and Republicans could come together on? Well, again, I talked about housing finance and maybe looking at the GSEs where there might be some consensus. Well, okay, that has been broken for how long? Well, for a long time. Democrats and Republicans can agree on. We don't want to deal with it. Everybody wants to. Yeah, something should be done. But no, you're right. But I mean, it's something that you could see moving to a consensus on. You could see, again, I talked about multi-employer retirement plans where there's already been some growing bipartisan consensus on that. May not get done this year, would spill over into next year, and you have a new chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Richard Neal, who is very interested in those things. So I think actually you can see, I think the other big issue that we want to watch closely is sort of more in the macro space. I know your other speakers talked about this, is fiscal policy. Mm-hmm. And do we have a status quo fiscal policy going forward? I think we want to avoid things like shutdowns. We have a debt limit. We're getting to the debt limit. March 1 is what's reported is coming up. We want to be careful with that as well. So then going forward, if you wanted to sort of press for more for deregulation, deal with leverage ratios for big banks or something, who do you now solicit? Like, is it the SEC? Is it the Fed, considering that Congress might not be as receptive anymore? Well, most of that work that's being looked at the rule set right now is being done by the regulators. I don't see that changing very much. I think they are taking a very deliberate, methodical approach to looking at the rules that were put in Dodd-Frank and the post-crisis reform, saying what's working, what's not working. They put forth some pretty sober proposals. They're working through that. And most of those officials are in place. They're in set terms. So I think we'll continue to see regulatory activity at the pace that it is right now. What about the Fed? Is it possible the Fed actually will be a little bit more protected? Because as I recall, a lot of the criticism of the independence of the Fed came from the House side, from Republicans, from conservatives. Now with the majority in Democrats, is it possible some of that rhetoric will die down? That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, the Fed's always, first of all, I think an independent Fed is terribly important. It's something that's a hallmark of the U.S. Not every other country has had that. Some have only recently done that. And the Fed is always under criticism. I mean, my time when I was on the House Banking Committee, Financial Services Committee, they took shots from both sides. But I think that there's a strong spirit within the Fed to protect their independence. I expect to see that going forward. So into President Trump's election in 2016, the big story was deregulation going to be good for banks.
thanks, really awesome, yay, yay. So we've sort of exhausted that scenario. What's the biggest risk in 2019 or the biggest catalyst that your members see?
I think the biggest risk, again, goes more to the broader macro issues, long-term government, not long-term, but government shutdowns, issues around the debt limit extension, not addressing that. I think those are the things we have to be concerned about, where we have disruption in sort of the normal functioning of the government. I'm not predicting that. I actually don't think that's what either want to do. And I think the thing we have to remember is all of these folks are going to want to get something done, put points on the board, because they're going to be up before the voters 2 years from now. So I think they're going to look for consensus where they can. I'm sure there'll be a lot of political fights. There always are. But I think at the end of the day, people are going to say, what can we do to say we've accomplished something?